Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Before we dive into the content, just a quick moment for some housekeeping. Hopefully you are able to see our presenters, to see the slides that are being shared, and to hear my voice right now. If that's not true, or if that changes as we go through today's presentation, please add your feedback in the chat section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we'll do what we can to try and help troubleshoot. Additionally, we are holding the time at the end of today's session for our presenters to go through as many of the questions that you have to submit as possible. So as we go through, if there's anything that they touch on that you'd like a bit more detail around, or that they don't mention and you are hoping to learn, please add those questions in the question section of your GoToWebinar menu, and we will hold time at the end of them to go through as many as possible. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to my teammate, Ginger. Ginger, what are we talking about today?
Thanks, Zoe. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. We're going to be talking today about our partnership with Duo and Appsian and how we create zero trust remote authentication for PeopleSoft. As Zoe said, I'm Ginger Lishman. I'm part of the technology partnerships team at Duo Security. I work with Appsian, and I'd like to introduce you to Greg Wendt, who's joining us today from Appsian. Greg, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ginger. Welcome, everybody. My name is Greg Wendt. I'm the Executive Director for the Security Solutions here at Appsian. I've been part of the team for about 6 years now, and I've probably implemented the interface with Duo hundreds of times now with lots of different customers, so we can get into all sorts of different use cases and implementations and questions and all those other type of things today. So I do have about 20 plus years as enterprise architect inside of the PeopleSoft systems in multiple different verticals. So very familiar with PeopleSoft and Duo, actually. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Ginger.
Thanks. So he's an expert. Feel free, as Zoe said, ask questions at the end, and we'll be sure to cover all of them. Ask any hard PeopleSoft Appsian questions, and we'll address that. So really quick, the things that we're going to cover in the webinar today. We're going to look at the leading security use cases where MFA is a best practice, challenges for integrating MFA with PeopleSoft, and how PeopleSoft MFA integration can limit user pushback and adoption. It's really important to think about that as many organizations now are focusing on enabling remote workers and they're moving to a remote workforce, this creates the need for organizations to maintain strict authentication measures into their critical business applications like PeopleSoft. And Greg, I'll push it over to you. As companies work to support their mobile workforce, what are the challenges that PeopleSoft users are facing?
It's definitely a big challenge. Thinking about just the issues of today's, shift to mobile workforce, a lot of corporate customers specifically have never ever allowed access to a PeopleSoft system outside of their network. So it's a large shift as to how people have accessed ERP level applications. Specifically before, they kind of housed it inside of my network and nobody could ever touch these things. Well, now if you think about it, you've got vendor access, you've got AP, payroll, benefits, all of these type of very high level functional people having to do all of their jobs remotely outside of your environment that you're typically used to. So it has really changed how people are accessing these ERP level applications. And, it's something too that if you think about holistically how these apps have been worked with over the years, higher ed happens to run a lot of PeopleSoft. The campus solutions is very popular. So a lot of the students that have been graduating over the last, 5 to 10 to 15 years have been working with remote PeopleSoft systems, adding, dropping, updating classes, all of those type things. And they expect to be able to have that type of access to a PeopleSoft system because that's what they grew up with. So now they're entering the job market, they're in management positions. So they're driving these organizations to change how they function, outside of just the main push that we've been dealing with here lately. So and ironically, most organizations don't have more people than they know what to do with. Everybody's doing more with less. So, it's difficult to do more with less when you don't have the access to the system besides inside of very regimented windows. So that's one of the reasons why we see, the access to ERP level systems changing so much over the last several years.
And thank you for the landscape, kind of, if you will, of the PeopleSoft area. As we kind of pull that out to a broader view of the shift in the general IT landscape, where we have users, we have devices, we have applications, they've all moved outside of the traditional network. And I think we're all very familiar with this change that's been taking over, place over the last decade or so. So we're now obviously in a world of cloud applications, mobile devices, remote employees. The traditional network security just doesn't cut it right now. There are certain new realities of working in a modern workplace that need to be addressed when you're thinking about security and the new modern perimeter. Since our users have changed, they're no longer just coming into the office and getting on the network there. You have to think about also that companies, as you mentioned there too, they're not only on the go, but they have contractors, they have third-party vendors, they have a variety of different users, if you will, that are trying to connect to their corporate network. And they're increasingly using their own devices, such as their own smartphones or their own tablets or laptops, also to connect to these networks. And then meanwhile, we still have applications, servers, and containers and other workloads that can be found communicating to each other across the cloud infrastructure like AWS and Azure, and also with data centers. And then we enter kind of into this even newer realm with the Internet of Things, or IoT. And so also now these devices are creating a different entry point or access to your network, which I think brings in some really interesting new challenges, because we've been aware for a while about that users are most often the easiest target for hackers. So it's easiest to target your users, try and compromise someone's account, gain their password. That's been happening for a while. I think we're all pretty familiar with that, and we're also familiar with the fact that almost 54% of web app vulnerabilities have a public exploit that's available to hackers, meaning if your servers and applications aren't patched, they're left open to known flaws that can be exploited, and they can gain access to your systems. But as I mentioned, when you also now you look at the IoT devices, it's another interesting point of entry that I think that people aren't always considering, that they need to also secure that. And just from the slide here, you can see that Kaspersky Labs found a 300% rise in IoT malware variants from just 2017 to 2018 that proves that connected devices are being targeted also by hackers. So they're thinking of kind of every which way that they can possibly get into your network. And Greg, are you seeing any of these same types of threats, or maybe some new threats that are really specific to PeopleSoft and their users?
Definitely. When we think about the threats that are approaching the PeopleSoft system, what you'll find is you may see brute force attacks where it's basically leveraging some sort of industry-wide breach to where they've got user IDs and passwords, because people have a tendency to share passwords across multiple different sites. So you can see brute force attacks there. It is a high target of phishing campaigns and targeted spear phishing campaigns directly. When you see some of the numbers here, most of the hacks inside of PeopleSoft, they're going to address the OS, or not the OS, but the web layer of PeopleSoft. And they're coming in at that layer because multiple different reasons. One, on the phishing attacks, users continually give up their user IDs and passwords. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's not they do it intentionally. They're busy and they're going to fall for it. It's not intentional. And it's, as the workforce has moved mobily, it's harder to tell if I'm looking at my mobile device that this is a phishing attack. I'm looking at something and I'm going to click on this email and I'm going to drive through. So they target very high targeted people like doctors, people that are busy, people that are often mobile. So we've seen that from a lot of teaching universities specifically, that they will target that. The hackers also have time to do all sorts of reconnaissance on your organization. So I've even seen scenarios where one of the big issues with PeopleSoft is the direct deposit theft. And what occurs is they'll do a targeted phishing campaign, look for somebody giving up their user ID and password, and then what happens is they're going to go ahead and challenge or get that password, and then they go in and update the direct deposit, so the next time that person gets paid, the money goes overseas. Organizations have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars to this. It's worked with employees. It's worked in campus with dropping classes and having the money refunded. It's worked as vendors. So it's kind of across the ERP level space. And that kind of ties into, some of the gaps in the PeopleSoft security model. PeopleSoft doesn't look at it as zero trust. When you authenticate, it's user ID and password, and then you have the roles and permissions that you're going to have inside of the application. That's the way it's going to work, the way it's always been designed. So when you're talking about allowing access remotely, it becomes very difficult to control that least privileged or zero trust. So that it's not built around transactional level. It's really built at that roles and permission list of, I've got this function that I'm going to be able to do. I can do that regardless of where I'm accessing the system from. And if you think about that, that doesn't necessarily work in today's environment. You need to be able to say, oh, this person's coming from somewhere they're not coming from. You need more of an attribute level control. You need more control over the data, not necessarily the transaction, to be able to understand, oh, this person's attempting to do this transaction, which includes this data. Now they need to go through stepped up authentication to be able to access that, because before we didn't necessarily trust them. So we're only going to allow them to do things that don't contain sensitive information, don't deal with financial transactions, those type of things. So it's really taking above and beyond. You have to go past those static access controls. You have to take in other layers of attributes to understand how far you can trust this individual when they're working with your system. And those are really, a lot of the scenarios that we run into. And I'll go through more when we demo stuff today as to some of the challenges that we see. But that's from a high level perspective, a lot of what we see. The hackers are smart. They understand the systems. They run them, and they understand the business processes of what you're attempting to do, sometimes better than your own employees do. So it makes it a challenge when you're trying to protect moving outside of the firewall and access to these ERP level systems.
So then that actually brings us into, as you said there, it's you log in with username and password, and then you're in. And I guess you're able to freely move about or do whatever it is that you want to do within PeopleSoft. Is that right?
Yep, correct. Exactly. Once you have those credentials, you are in, and you are then have all the permissions that you would normally have, regardless of where that location is, whether you're sitting at your desk or whether you're remote to the system.
Which is, as you said there too, it's not there's not a zero trust approach, I guess, with PeopleSoft currently. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously when you bring in Duo and Appsian together, then we start to do that actual MFA, granular access policies. We look at where the user is and all of that. And so I'm going to dive in more now to talk about how is zero trust different than the traditional approach that Greg already explained, where a user logs in, maybe it's a VPN or whatnot. It's a one-time login with username and password, and then you're in the network. So the biggest difference with zero trust is that you don't trust. And every access request, you're verifying all the information about the user, about their device, about their location, what they're allowed to access or not access, instead of having open access to all of the applications behind, say, your firewall. So when you compare the traditional approach to security with the zero trust approach, you find that obviously the first one, or the traditional, is based solely on the network location the access request originates from. Whereas in the zero trust approach, trust is much more dynamic and adaptive. It's established for every access request, no matter where it comes from, even if it's coming from the network. And this approach prevents hackers from moving laterally within your network to get to your data. It also secures access to your apps and networks and only allows the right users and devices to get access. But in addition to obviously the better access security, the zero trust approach also supports the modern enterprise model of the personal devices, or the BYOD, bring your own device, cloud apps, a hybrid cloud, and on-premise environment. So it supports the changing IT structure, if you will, or the changing IT landscape. And Cisco, we're happy to announce, I think probably many people are familiar with Cisco, but we're happy to share that Cisco was recently named a leader in zero trust by Forrester. And Duo is a key part of Cisco's overall zero trust platform. So Duo, we ensure that there's secure access by users and their devices before they get access to enterprise applications. And as you can see on this slide here, Cisco Zero Trust is broken into 3 key areas of accessing your workforce, your workload, and your workplace. And Cisco Zero Trust allows you to consistently enforce policy-based controls while gaining visibility into users, devices, components, and more across your entire environment. And Duo is powering, as I mentioned, the solution as it relates to securing your workforce. I'll just touch on the other 2. You can secure your workloads with tetration by securing the connections within your applications across the multi-cloud. And you can secure your workplace with SD access by securing the connections across your local network, including the interconnected devices and operational technology like printers, cameras, badge scanners, and more. So we break it into Cisco breaks it into the 3 pillars, and then Duo protects the workforce, which is really your first step into on your Zero Trust journey. So I'm going to just focus now on Duo. And how do we deliver Zero Trust for your workforce? So as I mentioned, our focus is on securing the user connecting to an application from any device. The new network perimeter is wherever an access decision happens. And Duo protects this new perimeter by verifying the user trust, confirming that they are who they say they are, and by using our best-in-class adaptive multi-factor authentication. We verify the user's identity, then we ensure the security hygiene of their devices. So that's their personal device, that's their corporate device, that spans across mobile phones, tablets, laptops, desktops. And we give IT admins the ability to enable granular application access controls before allowing users to connect to the applications they need to do their job. And IT administrators, you'll benefit by only needing to use one single admin panel. And from there, you can manage users, you can set access policies, and ultimately get, again, that granular visibility into which user is using what device and which applications are they gaining access to, and which do they actually need to be in, or which do they actually need to have access to. So to provide a little more context around access requests, an example I like to give is, let's just say I'm at home and I'm requesting access to an application that I normally don't use, and it's 2 a.m. So Duo will see that this is coming in, even though it's from maybe an IP that I've accessed many times before. They'll see that that's coming in, but the timing is off. It's an application, again, I don't use. So we'll stop that and make the individual verify their identity. And again, we'll still take a look at the device and make sure it meets your security posture needs. And if they have access, if I'm allowed to access that application, then I'll be in, unless some other control has been set by the IT administrator. So we do this, I'm going to dive more into user trust, which is really the first thing that we do at Duo. I think everyone's familiar with Duo, or if you're not, this is a great time to learn that Duo establishes trust for the workforce, obviously by verifying the identity of the user and the trust of the device before granting access to the application. So the first step is multi-factor authentication, something you know, something you have, or something you are. Now there's a multitude of methods by which you can form MFA with Duo. Our flagship product is our Duo Push, which is in our Duo mobile app that you can install. And we also support like U2F, SMS, passcodes, biometrics, and more. So once a user logs in to say their Outlook email, they'll put in their primary username and password, pass it, and then Duo kicks in to say, okay, that matched. We'll now do something else to prove that you are you. Maybe that's a push notification on your phone from the Duo mobile app. Maybe it's an SMS code or something like that. So it's a second step authentication that you have to do to prove your identity. And this protects you from identity-based attacks. Whereas you said in the case that hackers are smart, they're going to phish. It's most likely, if you haven't already, you've probably been a victim of maybe a breach from some other service. So it's important to make sure that even if they get your password, there's still a way that you can stop them. And that's where, as I said, we'll protect you from those types of attacks. We'll thwart attackers with those compromised passwords, and we'll provide zero trust access for your applications and create less reliance on passwords alone. Now, we like to say also that we're the world's easiest MFA because it's so easy to enroll users and authenticate. And that's one of the reasons that administrators love us so much. It's you have multiple options to use MFA with Duo. You can roll Duo out to your employees pretty quickly, and it's a user self-enrollment. And so employees can actually, as I said, enroll themselves. And we provide a consistent remote access to multi-cloud and hybrid environments, including your cloud infrastructure providers, as well as on-premise and cloud applications. As I said, we're easy to deploy from an administrative perspective. You can onboard tens of thousands of users in 2 weeks. In fact, we have a customer or a university in Boston that was able to enroll 24,000 students in less than 2 months. And I think that you'll probably find that that's very, very, very fast. And we allow you to send that out quickly. Like, we'll help IT administrators get people set up with Duo really quickly. Since we do support the broadest range of MFA options, it's any option that best fits maybe your business need or your use case, we support it. So if you maybe have limited cell service or limited internet connectivity, we have other options for that. As I mentioned, Duo Push is our most popular, and it's very secure, but we also support security keys, biometrics through WebAuthn. In addition, SMS or whatnot. So it's an opportunity for you to use the easiest MFA and the broadest range of options. I think that this is probably, when it comes to compliance requirements, this is probably the biggest driver of why a lot of companies seek out MFA. And so it's a there's so many industry regulations and compliance requirements. Every security best practice guide and regulation asks for MFA and device visibility. Duo can help your organization meet components of compliance and regulatory requirements, such as a secure, easy-to-use platform that provides the foundation for zero trust security. And I just want to touch on here, we're also FedRAMP certified. That's probably been within the last 6 or 7 months. We have special federal editions of Duo. So if you're interested in that, or you have a federal, or you're in the federal space, please reach out to us. We would love to show you more. And I think I'll stop here also, Greg, because I know that Appsian also helps with compliance.
Yes, and I mean, a lot of them are the exact same things that you're covering here. Many of the times what we're going to see is a customer is going to just have a mandate, coming down from one of these requirements. It could be the fact of GDPR. So we've got a lot of customers over in Europe, for example, and, it's like we have to protect sensitive data. It's a mandate. You have to. So, any database that contains sensitive data has to have some sort of multi-factor tied to it, which, Duo does very well. So, I mean, that's what we see a lot of controls around, regardless of the verticals. We're in healthcare, we're in financials, we're in higher ed, government. Higher ed, a lot of the times, they have as much information in a campus system as a bank does when you're looking at all the financial aid and the individuals that are stored in there. So when you're talking about storing of sensitive data, they have mass amounts of sensitive data. And the privacy laws that have come into effect are a real concern with what's moving forward. And that's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. I anticipate, here in the U.S., you see the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is, driving some of those regulations. You see GDPR over in Europe. Canada's talked about taking GDPR exactly like it is and implementing it there. I would imagine within the next 3 to 5 years, we probably have some sort of federal law in the United States, because I can't imagine that we're going to have to deal with all 50 states over some sort of data privacies. And, that would be a real big challenge that I hope we can stay away from, honestly. But, California's kind of already made the start to it. But, it is the requirement that, sensitive data has to be protected, and, regardless of the organization that you're in. It could be healthcare, it could be, even in supply chain, you may have private recipes that you want to remain private. You want data, it's not necessarily true sensitive data, but it's, proprietary data for your organization that you want to keep that way. And you want to keep it inside your systems and don't want people accessing it. So, implementing MFA around that is a great way to stop that kind of access inside of that data, inside of your system. So, the compliance is a huge challenge for a lot of organizations. And we've helped a lot of customers, integrate Duo with our platform and really help solve those problems.
And I suspect that we're going to, as you mentioned, we'll probably have a federal Privacy Protection Act or Online Privacy Protection Act, and we'll probably see even more more compliance requirements pop up in different industries too, as technology just keeps advancing.
Yes. One of my questions is what's going to happen with the Internet of Things, the biometrics and all the devices that people are wearing and the amount of data that transfers, corporate networks and, educational networks with all of that information that's out there. So, I think you're right. The compliance, the requirements, things are going to get a lot tighter before they loosen up at all.
Thank you for sharing. And now we're going to talk about device trust. So on top of Duo's MFA, we touched on already, of course, that we also look at the devices too. So the interesting part of this is that you can't protect what you can't see. So gaining visibility into the devices and establishing device trust is an essential part of a strong zero trust strategy. Compromised devices can access your data, and attackers exploit known vulnerabilities. So to help protect against this, Duo provides you visibility into every single device on your network and enforces health checks at every single login attempt. We gain visibility into the endpoint, whether that's the mobile phone, the laptop, the desktop, the tablet, and we can see if a device is corporate managed or not. So once we establish the identity, then we make sure the devices are trusted, they're updated, they have the latest OS, maybe they have security lock enabled if it's a mobile phone, and that we're providing role or attribute-based access to every application in your environment. Now here's an example you can see here on the screen of our Duo health applications in action. So again, as part of the continuous inspection that we're doing to the devices where we give you the visibility into them, we also will assess more about the posture. So as I mentioned, you can set up an access policy that if their software is out of date, then they can't access maybe the more important applications or the more high priority applications. We can also take a look to see, is it encrypted? Is the device encrypted when it comes to like laptops and such? Do you have a firewall enabled? These are just basic security checks that are done at the point of access every time that a request is made. And it's a security control that admins now have so that you know more about the security of the devices that allows you to kind of set up those policies again to say, yay, nay, or everybody needs to update to this OS because there's a known vulnerability that we need addressed right away. And we not only allow you to set those policies, we also make it really easy for the end user to make that update. So they know exactly what they need to do to gain access to the application. So the IT admin, you don't have to get involved in that part of the business. It should save you a lot of service tickets. And since we're accessing the devices, I want to kind of mention here too, we are not an MDM, but we can tell if a device is managed or unmanaged. And we can help you also, again, set up those policies. If it's only corporate managed devices that can access certain applications, then we can help you do that. Or if you want to allow, again, personal devices, but they need updated software or something other like that. And we do work with the leading MDM vendors such as Meraki, AirWatch, Mobile Iron, and Microsoft's Intune as an example. But we are not an MDM, so even though we are installed on the device, we're not monitoring your actual activity, we're just monitoring the security of the device, and we don't have the ability to lock you out or erase photos or anything like that when it comes to your personal devices. We get that a lot, we know it's a concern. So I just want to stress again, we're not an MDM, but we do work with MDMs if that's part of your corporate security posture. And this is an example or an image of our Duo admin panel. This is one of the other benefits of using Duo is that we give you one complete consolidated view of all the devices that are accessing your network. And you can see who's out of date, who's blocked because they haven't maybe updated certain things or enabled a firewall, or maybe their access request came from a location that was risky, something or other like that. All of that gets flagged in our Duo admin panel, and you can take a look at it. And you can also set your policy controls here that will limit the access based on the device and the user trust, because we do have adaptive authentication. So we give you that unified device visibility into the inventory of all the devices that are on your network, the corporate owned, the personal, the laptops, mobiles, all of that. And then you can decide if you want to block, you want to warn users or notify them that they have 7 days to update their Chrome or something other like that before they can access an application. And obviously, since we allow the users to understand what it is that they need to do to remediate the situation, that cuts down, again, as I said, on IT tickets, and admins love that. You can also pull security reports and logs for compliance audits from our dashboard here. So really the last piece, in addition to establishing the user's identity and the security of the device, is the protecting every application. So this is where, as I've already been talking about, you can set access policies. So once you verify the identity, the device, now you set the policies. You can take a look and make policies based on where the user's located, is the time of day that they're making an access request, the trust of their identity and their security of their device. And all this is still checked by Duo before we give you access. It's the principle of least privilege, which means limiting access to data and applications to only those people that need access to do their job. And we allow you to set that role-based access control and restrict access to applications based on the user's roles and job responsibilities. So an example we'd like to give is maybe you want a different policy for those who can access email versus those who can access maybe the company holiday calendar. So perhaps for email, again, I need to be, maybe you set up a policy that I need to be on a device that's already trusted, and I need to be in an area that is that I've been logging in from before. And then for the holiday calendar, maybe it's a lot easier, and it's something that you will allow anyone to kind of access that's already on the network. And then the funness of this slide is that we make it easy to protect all your other applications. So in addition to PeopleSoft, working with Appsian, we also have pre-built integrations that are out of the box with hundreds of applications. So you don't even need to build the integration. Take a look at our Duo Ready partners and our Duo admin panel. You're going to find hundreds of integrations. If you need to build an integration with Duo, though, you can easily do so, as we support over a dozen ways to do that. We're easy, we're cloud-based, we're developer-friendly, we have RESTful APIs, we have developer kits, we support a dozen different languages, and we have great technical documentation and active community forums that can all assist you with getting started with Duo, in addition to technical support. In fact, we try to make it so easy to integrate with Duo that any application really can be integrated with us in under 10 minutes. And so then the last piece I want to go back to is the enforcing adaptive policies. So as I mentioned, Duo lets you implement requirements for access based on the sensitivity of the resources and the known security state of the device to help manage risk levels. These policies can range from allowing only corporate managed devices to requiring certain versions of patch software, encryption, step-up authentication, etc. It's really, there's so many options that you can really dive into it and really think critically about the access that you want to give to particular applications and make it maybe the highest privilege access or the lowest privilege access. So one of the things that we noticed that a lot of IT admins struggle with is enforcement of the personal devices and policies. And since we are an application that's installed on those, we'll know immediately if it's a personal device, if it's corporate, and we can give you that visibility so that you can say, yay, nay, you can come here, you can go there, but you can't do X, Y, Z. So an example that I like to give is that maybe I'm in the sales org, and you can set up a global access policy that everybody in sales can access Salesforce, but not Jira. Whereas in the engineering org, everyone can access Jira, but they can only do it from a corporate managed device. So those are some scenarios you can think about, because we allow you to set up access policies, again, at the application level, but also at a group level and a global level. So as you dive in and really kind of assess and make sure that only particular users and groups are accessing the applications that they actually need to access. So we have an example here, and Greg, I'll let you walk us through this, of some of the use cases that organizations set up PeopleSoft Access with Duo and Appsian.
Definitely. So one of the things that you know, when we're looking at the screen there of the slide, is we've got multiple different scenarios. So I am going to walk through a couple of these different scenarios. So you should be able to see my screen. I'm now at a PeopleSoft login page. Some of the scenarios that we get into are, I want to challenge a user who's off of my network. You know, when they're on my network, they're going to be trusted. Some of the ways that I've actually set up multi-factor in the past was thinking about it this way. If I'm on the network, then I don't want to do MFA. If I'm on my VPN, the way that VPN was set up, it wasn't quite trusted because it didn't have multi-factor tied into it. So at that point, even if I connected via the VPN, I had to go through multi-factor. If I connected from the internet, for example, then I had to do multi-factor. But if I connected to the VPN, did a remote desktop into my machine, then I could actually access content without having to go through MFA because I was viewed on my network at that point. So lots of different scenarios. That's the fun part about implementing MFA is you can decide exactly how you want to do that with lots of users. So let's jump into a couple specific to PeopleSoft. When we talk about some of the areas of challenge that we've had in the past before, especially some of the customers, let's go back to that direct deposit threat. So when we're talking about that direct deposit threat, oh, that's exciting. Hold on just one second.
It's a live demo.
Yeah, it is a live demo, and that's a fun thing to happen in the middle of it. Let's see. Normally that goes away.
We can also, while you pull that up, we can also take a look, Zoe, if you can go back to the slide that I have up at the architecture. So where does Appsian sit in PeopleSoft with Duo? Let me just show that.
Yeah, so that's actually probably a good place to start anyway. So what we are a plugin that sits inside the PeopleSoft web server. So when you're thinking about PeopleSoft, it's obviously a multi-tier implementation. So you have not only a web server and application server, but then you have a database server as well. So we are a plugin that sits inside the PeopleSoft web server. And what that allows us to do is interact with how the users are working with the application set in general. So it allows us to step in the way. What we have is a project that also gets installed into the PeopleSoft application database that allows us to configure how we want things to interact with the end users from a security perspective, whether that's single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, data masking, all sorts of other things that we actually do there. So that plugin allows us to implement that multi-factor challenge with Duo without having to really, you as an organization, that's all you have to do. I mean, you kind of commented earlier about how quickly Duo is up and running and installed, and I can honestly say that's the exact same scenario as to what we've got with our systems is, implementing Duo is very quick. From our perspective, the organizations normally end up being able to implement it in, a very short period of time. And by that, I mean, you have a demo environment up within hours and you're able to implement those challenges wherever you want. So that's the type of implementation that we're talking about. And when you're talking about integrating with an ERP system, especially PeopleSoft like that, this is something that organizations can spend 6 months to a year working on. So being able to integrate it that quickly really gives you an ROI to be able to leverage the enterprise initiatives. And that's really what our security platform does, is it allows you to take that enterprise initiative, in this case, multi-factor. So we want to apply that to our ERP system, just like we do the rest of the applications. I mean, going back to the slide that you had with all of the different applications that you guys work with and integrate, you want to make sure that it's a holistic security approach, and you can't leave out an ERP system because of the data that it has. It's just massive from that perspective, and you need to be able to make sure that that data is protected and that system is protected as much as any other system is at that point. So, it's definitely one of those things that is important to be able to understand and implement, not only the enterprise initiatives, but everything else as to what's going on inside of your system. And you want to bring all of those, into whether that's MFA, for example, single sign-on, all of that type of stuff. So our integration really occurs at that web server layer. If you hand it back now, I'll jump through the demo. So
And I just
we
want
can kind
to
of show.
add on there, since we already have an integration built between the two of us, so between Duo and Appsian, and Duo can normally, you can build an integration, as I mentioned, in as fast as 10 minutes. So you can actually integrate Duo and Appsian, probably what, a minute, maybe two? You just sign up, throw
Yeah,
some keys in
it's
there.
fast.
It's fast.
Yep. So let's go back to some of those scenarios that I was talking about. Now, if I could type, you can never type when there's all these people watching you type. I'm going to go ahead and log in as a self-service user. If you think about how a self-service user is going to access the system, for example, they're only going to be in maybe once, twice, maybe monthly. Sometimes you may not have a user come in, except for major business events, thinking benefits enrollment, pension, those type things. So they're not going to necessarily be in the system every day, not like your high privileged users. So it is a very different flow from that perspective. So what we will typically see is those users are allowed into the system. I'm going to show something, and this is just kind of for reference. But when we look at, our security platform, we allow you to mask data in the PeopleSoft system without having to modify it. So it's important to be able to decide, going back to what Ginger was talking about, this basically brings in zero trust. I'm not going to trust that I'm just going to give you access to everything until you meet certain requirements. So even though you're looking at your self-service access, if you're coming in from off of the network, I'm not going to display certain information. That way, in case, you've given up your credentials to a hacker, I'm not going to have to worry about your data being exposed. So I'm going to protect you. So we can go about that multiple different ways. But when we talk about this data masking, I wanted to show that first to kind of set the precedence, because when we go back to that threat that I was talking about earlier, specifically around direct deposit, what we have done is we have taken Duo, integrated it into the PeopleSoft application at a field level mask. So it makes sense. This user can access the direct deposit page. Maybe they just wanted to see how many accounts their paycheck went into. Maybe it was the percentage going into each one of the accounts. But if they need to update the actual account number and make changes to that page, that's when they actually have to go through that targeted stepped-up authentication. So at that point, I'm going to unlock this field, and you're going to see the familiar Duo interface that you guys are used to. So I'm going to do a push notification. It supports all of the functionality of what you've seen, so I can do a call, I can do a passcode, all of that type of functionality. So I'm just going to do a push notification. Since I am sharing video, I'll throw up my phone. So here is my phone. I'll go ahead and hit the yes, and you can see that it contextually understands exactly where I was in the application. And it's going to bring me right back to that account number. So that's where our interface working with the Duo allows you to understand exactly what's happening in the app, to be able to control what the user is doing and apply that multi-factor when and where it's needed. So now that user has gone through stepped-up authentication, so then they can go about their normal flow. By default, this is going to be session-based, so it's the user's only going to have to pass the multi-factor until they either time out or log out. Then at that particular point, we're going to want to inject the multi-factor again. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about a different scenario. I'm still in as this self-service role, right? Well, what about controlling access to high privileged use cases? So I've got a couple of different ways that I can do that. You go back to, what PeopleSoft does by default is it gives you access to all of your roles and permission lists. So how PeopleSoft normally works is you have multiple roles. Well, when I was an enterprise architect, for example, I had my self-service role that I would use my account for, and then I would have my PeopleSoft architect role that I need to log into and be able to work with. But at that particular point, I don't want them to be the same account inside of PeopleSoft, because then I lose accountability and those type of things. So what I'm going to do is going to go to the classic home, and I'm going to switch now into that higher privileged account. So what that does is it allows me to transition into my PeopleSoft admin account. So I'm going to go ahead and select the user that I want to switch into. I'm going to switch into PS, which is the highest privileged account inside of PeopleSoft that gets delivered. And there you're going to see the Duo challenge once again. For me to transition or to work with this really high privileged account, I have to go through that stepped up authentication. That goes back to the zero trust. I'm working with such a high level account. I want that protection in the system. I'll do a push notification. I won't show it to you guys this time since I already did. And then you can see that I'm transitioning. Our security platform allows you to log this, and now we understand who was working with that. But to reach that stepped up authentication, I can go through that process. When I'm done doing whatever I need to be able to do, I can switch back in and just flip back to the normal level account. So that's one way that we can definitely integrate Duo into, expanding outside of that zero trust that we've been talking about. That's so important. I'm going to go ahead and log out and talk about another scenario. One of the things that we see here is I'm going to log in a high privileged, not a super high privileged, but something that has access to back office. So when you think about certain functions, one of the things that I have seen, and I've done about 250 security reviews with different customers, is when somebody gains access to PeopleSoft, they're going to attempt to do a couple of different things. One, they're going to try to steal your identity. Two, they're going to attempt to steal your paycheck. Three, they're going to attempt to pivot into a high privileged account. And four, they're going to try to gain access to queries so they can exfiltrate lots of data out of your PeopleSoft system. So at that point, what we did here is, just from an example, is if somebody does attempt to access the query tool, because that is where you have access to enterprise level data, you can see everybody in the company that you've been given access to, but you can also take that data out. So if I attempt to go into the query manager, you can see that I can do very contextual based multi-factor of I am accessing a specific part of the application. Now I want to go ahead and make that user do a multi-factor challenge, because it's important for them to prove who they are, for them to be able to access this function, because it is so sensitive inside of the organization. This is an HCM system, so I would have access to all of the payroll information, benefits, dependents, all of that. I don't want that data to leave. I don't want people to work with that data unless they've actually proven and gone through that stepped up authentication that they are who they are. So it's really streamlined, efficient. You can see that it's integrated into the application, and it's really specific as to how we integrate. One of the things that I thought I'd show you, just from a configuration, I know some of you are used to the Duo system. So when we talk about our platform, we plug in, I'm just going to bring open the Duo configuration, and you can see that when I do, it is really working with the secret key, the API key, and the I key within that application. So once you populate that information, our security platform is going to go ahead and communicate directly to Duo, and you can integrate it into PeopleSoft quickly. So going back to that example of how quick when we do it, really within minutes at that point. So it is very streamlined, it's efficient, it's very quick, and it's something that allows you to take control back over your ERP system, take control back over those transactions, implement those multi-factor where it makes sense and how you want to do it inside of the application. So any thoughts on that, Ginger?
Well, I was just thinking again about the speed, that all I really have to do to set it up is log into Duo, grab the keys, log in over here and paste them in.
Yep, exactly.
So let's, just so we still have time, let's go back to the presentation, and because I know we have a great customer success story that you want to share.
Definitely. So yeah, one of the success stories that we really have is at Hackensack Meridian Health. They were really their challenge, and they were issued this challenge. I mean, we kind of talked about earlier how it's either a mandate or it's a compliance issue. For some particular reason, you have to do this. So their requirement was they needed to integrate Duo with multi-factor single sign-on to enable secure remote access. It was specific to remote access to PeopleSoft. It was something that their network was hardened to the level that they didn't want to do MFA on the network, but they needed to do it for people who were accessing it remotely. And ironically enough, they did this about a year to 18 months ago. So if you think about it, they leveraged this and did it at the exact right time. So when COVID hit and now everybody is remote, they already had their security policies in play. Everybody was already doing multi-factor. So that we were able to integrate, seamlessly with Duo. We went live within 2 weeks, talking about the speed of how we were able to do it, the complexity. They plugged it in, they got it up and running, and it now protects, completely their environment of bringing in, what they were leveraging Duo for with all the other applications, brings it into their PeopleSoft ERP system. very quickly, efficiently, and now they're able to protect all of their resources. So it was a great project, very quick. They've actually done a lot of things with it. So it's really been excited to see how they were doing it and how they're leveraging it now, especially with the workforce shift to being remote. It was kind of thought as to nurses, okay, well, let me, accept a schedule because they swap and change schedules and do all those type of things. So it's like, all right, well, that's kind of what it was designed around. But now all of a sudden their entire work, a lot of the workforce is working from home for, many of these organizations. So a lot more people are able to leverage that than what they initially thought.
And I'll just touch on where can you check this out? Or no, actually, it's Q&A. Sorry. Let's go to Q&A, Zoe. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got some good questions coming in here. I think the first one is going to be for Greg. Is PeopleSoft typically just an on-prem service?
No, it's not. I mean, we support any of the environments. We have a lot of customers that are running in the cloud. We have some that are on-prem yet. We have some that are in managed services with different partners. Ironically, one of the things that I have seen is some of the organizations that have 100% on-prem, they may think they have better controls over it, so maybe they don't do MFA. But it's interesting that the ones that have gone to managed services or even AWS or, cloud type environments, they really want to implement multi-factor because somebody else has access to their system. So it's like if you're in a hosted environment, now all of a sudden it changes the whole scope as to who can see your data. So you definitely want to make sure that you have the protections in place then. So that's where I see a bigger drive, for multi-factor in general, as well as when they are shifting to that managed services, any cloud type infrastructure, because you want to make sure that that data and the systems are protected with multi-factor when you go to an environment like that.
Excellent. Ginger, I think this next one is for you. What is the cost for Duo in order to do this integration?
Oh, well, so Duo, our pricing is very upfront. And if you go to duo.com/pricing, that'll show you the full details. But we basically have 3 tiers. We have a package at $3 per user per month, $6 per user per month, or $9 per user per month. So that's unlimited applications. We don't charge per application. It's just per user. So if you have Duo, you're signed up for one of those packages, that's how much we would charge you per user that you have enabled with Duo.
Excellent. Greg, back to you. How does the Appsian integration affect future PeopleSoft updates?
Oh, that's a real good question. So when you're talking about future PeopleSoft updates, inside of PeopleSoft, there's a couple of different update methodologies. One is the PeopleSoft Update Manager, which is the PUMs, which manage the functional side of the applications. We don't communicate on the functional side at all. So it's not something that's going to affect us. We communicate more at the tools layer. So when you're talking about which tools we integrate with, we actually integrate with everything with about 848 and above, especially when we're talking about Duo. So specifically, we'll give you an executable to install on the web server and then into the database. And we understand the differences between all of those. So the install that we give you today would work with everything from 857 current all the way back. So very streamlined and efficient. Typically, when the organization does a tools upgrade, they would talk to our customer support team just to make sure that there isn't any challenges or issues, or if they need to take an updated build at that time.
Great. Can you put the multi-factor at the PeopleSoft login page?
Yes, you can. If you remember from my demo how I switched into the PS account using that privileged user access, you can also set that up to where if when you're utilizing the PeopleSoft login page, different roles, different user IDs, any of those type things could then apply multi-factor. So what we do is we take those attribute based, and depending upon how they're connecting into the system, you can go ahead and apply that security to it. So I could have shown you that as well, and I probably should have. So bad on me for that.
Well, I guess if they want to see it, they should reach out, and you can walk them through all of the scenarios.
How is the Appsian plugin priced? Are there different options available, like tiers or integration levels?
Yes, there are different integration levels and tiers. So it's something that we could scope that with some of our sales teams. I would say if there's interest in that, we can definitely follow up on a call. We have a solution specifically for MFA with the integration. So there's a couple of different questions that we'd have to scope it correctly from a price perspective. But it's something that we can get up and running quickly.
So we've got two here that I think are kind of related. Do we need a Duo and an Appsian license, or does the Duo price include the Appsian license? And as a add-on to that, does Appsian require Duo Beyond for remote access, or will it work with Duo Access Edition?
I'll answer the first part. Yeah, they are two separate licenses. So you would need to, get a license for Duo and a license for Appsian. And then Greg, for the second part, I want to say all Duo editions, but I'll double check with you.
We actually support, we're going to tie back to basically what's set up on the Duo website. So how your account is set up is what we're going to leverage. So typically that question kind of comes in when you're talking about the auto enrolling of features and people and things like that. So when you saw our dialog box come up with the Duo controls, it's basically at that point it's tying back to the way your Duo is set up and controlled. So we're going to leverage all of the settings coming from there.
Okay, so then I'll answer that. Since they do work with any Duo edition, then obviously it depends there which Duo edition you have, and then that will play into how much information you get back from the device security posture and some of our other benefits. So, but we work together at any level and obviously have strong multi-factor authentication. So it's a great place to get started.
I know we're in the lightning round window here, but we have two more questions if we can fit them in. What are the PeopleSoft prerequisites that need to be in place before integrations are possible?
Really, from the PeopleSoft perspective, it doesn't matter which functional version you're using. So we have customers that are using Duo on their financial stack, CRM, Campus Solutions, HCM, their portal. So pretty much all of the PeopleSoft application stack we can support. So that's not a challenge. When you're talking about the PeopleTools release version, I would say anything over PeopleTools 5.0. Normally right now, most of the customers are about 5.4 to 5.7 version of PeopleTools. So, as long as you're decently current, you should be good to go. And if you have a question about a specific version, I would say definitely we can follow up with you on that because there's just a couple of questions that we'd have to have, but we actually have the Duo support for some pretty good older releases.
Great, and I think we've got time for one more right now, and then there's a couple folks I see that we have more coming in that we'll have to follow up with. In addition to the PeopleSoft HRMS, can this also be used with PeopleSoft Campus Solutions?
Yes, definitely. We've actually got quite a few customers that we've worked together that have implemented it in Campus Solutions. So, the main question is how big of a group are they talking to manage? So I know a couple of universities are well over 60,000 that they're managing with Duo in our system, in our interface with that. So, it's very quick, to get up and running. So works with all of them.
Excellent. And I know we're right up at the top of the hour here, so we do have a couple of last questions coming in here for folks. Just know I am getting those saved so that we can follow up with you directly to get those answered. I want to thank everybody for joining today's session. You will receive an email with a link to the video of this presentation tomorrow. Please let us know your feedback on if this content was valuable to you or if you have follow-up questions after we hop off of the line. I want to thank our presenters as well. Presenters, do we have any final thoughts we want to leave folks with?
Oh, I would just say on the Duo side, visit our demo site, demo.duo.com. You can play around, see Duo in action, and you can also try us out free for 30 days.
I would like to say just thank you to Duo for having us today. We'd love to, implement a lot of the customers quickly and efficiently inside of PeopleSoft. So, if there's any additional questions, just let us know. And thank you for your time today. We appreciate being here.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. We hope to see you on another Duo webinar very soon. Have a great day.
Bye.